Welcome back to The Right Life 101. This is the fifth part in my series, The Genre You Love to Write. This segment is called How to Write a Fantasy Novel. For writers who love creating, writing a fantasy novel is truly a dream come true. Make no mistake, it can be quite a daunting task, but the rewards are unmatched. In this video, I will talk about my favorite genre, fantasy. I started off by saying that writing in the fantasy genre is quite a daunting task, and that's because it really is. When you're writing fantasy, you're actually creating an entirely new existence. From the elaborate, never before seen settings to the rare and unique characters to the plot that must facilitate them. No wonder the average word count for a fantasy novel is around 110,000 words. That's 60,000 words more than the word count of a short novel. You could literally write two of these and one children's book with that word count. If you saw my video where I talked about my first published novel, it was a fantasy and I sent it off to several publishers and got denied each time. I made the mistake of only making it 200 pages, which is about 50,000 words. Way too short for a fantasy novel. Then I rewrote it and extended it to 500 pages, which is about 125,000 words. I was picked up by the first publisher I sent it to. Now, I'm mentioning this because if you're intending on writing in the fantasy genre, don't make the mistake I made and think you can change the rules to suit yourself. Fantasy novels are a minimum 80,000 words and can go up to 200,000 words. And if you don't think you can commit to at least 80,000 word length novels, then I'm sorry, but this genre just isn't for you. It really isn't. The same thing applies if you intend to write a romance novel where the maximum is 100,000 words, but you hand in a 200,000 word novel. I'm thinking that my mentioning of a 200,000 word novel has you a little worried. Because that's 800 pages. 800. But don't worry. Those lengths are usually reserved for epic or high fantasy novels by established authors like Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, and J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter. But if you're just getting your feet wet in this genre, then you will probably start out with the most basic fantasy story. I say basic, but there really isn't anything basic about writing a fantasy novel. And that's because of the setup. The setup entails so much that it might take some writers less time to write an entire novel in another genre than it takes to set up a novel in the fantasy genre. Not to scare you out of this genre, but you need to understand that before you can even begin telling your amazing story, you need to build the world you're going to tell it in. And that can be quite daunting. Let's start with the setting because the setting is very important in a fantasy novel. In other genres, the setting might be an abandoned amusement park or an airplane or the side of a mountain. It could even be inside an elevator. I saw a movie once where a guy was trapped underground in a coffin, and the whole movie he's trying to get out. I'm sure you've read a novel or watched a movie with one of these settings and it worked quite well. And that's not the case with a fantasy novel. For it to be believable, you need to create an entire world. When it comes to world building, if you get this wrong, you're setting your novel up for disappointment. If you have ever watched the movie The Lord of the Rings, Think about how you felt when you saw that setting. It was done so well, it had the ability to immerse you in that world and prepare you for the story you were about to receive. When you watched that movie, you probably took the setting for granted, not realizing all that went into the creation of it. From the castles down to the trees, a great deal of thought and effort went into the creation of something that might have only been on the screen for less than a minute. I remember when I attempted world building for my novel, The Warrior Sage. I didn't do all of my setting creation at the beginning. You can't because the setting is forever developing. In one scene, I had my main character visiting a castle. Now, when I was a kid in England, I saw castles all the time. But so many years later, I couldn't properly visualize one, so I needed to do some extensive research on castles. But back then, it wasn't like today where you can simply Google a couple hundred images of different castles. I had to do it the old school way. So off I went and spent the entire morning going through book after book and researching everything I could about castles that existed about 800 years ago. And that was just for the castles. What kinds of homes did the peasants live in? What were they made of 800 years ago? So off I went to the library again. I needed to know what the peasants wore, what the royals wore, what the peasants ate, what the royals ate. What could a shilling buy back then? So to the library again. And again, and again, and again. I spent weeks traveling to and from the library each day. I was there so often that if I missed a day, the librarian thought something had happened to me. And I spent so much time getting my world as close to real as possible because although you, as the writer, are creating this world, it should be based on something real. That is, if you intend your reader to believe it. It's your setting, and you can design it however you like. But in my case, when I'm building a home where a peasant family live, when I'm describing it, if I feel like saying it was made from the finest stone and a slate roof and double glazed windows, my setting will not be taken seriously. So I took the time to research what one was like and discovered that they were made of wood and the roof was made of straw. And the floor was often dirt, and it usually had two rooms, one for the humans and one for their animals. Sticking to this detail, I was able to slowly develop a setting that was something to be proud of. It would continue to need adjusting along the way, but let's face it, that's part of the joy of creating in the first place. In the second segment of How to Write a Fantasy Novel, I'll talk about a very important aspect of the world you have created, your characters. Thanks for watching, and if you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.